Hello my fabulous dream chasers and welcome back to my channel. This is the fifth installment of Nancy Drew, The Secret of the Old Clock. I'm still recording on my iPad. I kind of find it a bit easier to do this. To do it on this. I might be kind of slow at reading today, kind of tired, and I have not been feeling the best today. I've felt nauseous for most of the day. So, anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead with chapters 9 and 10. Should be wearing my reading glasses, but I don't know where I put them. Maybe they're in my purse? Nope. Alright, we're going without them. Alright. Chapter 9. Helpful Disclosures. Nancy watched Abby Rowan intently as the mantel clock finished striking. The elderly woman's lips had begun to move. "The clock," she whispered. "That was it, the clock." Nancy gripped the arms of her chair in excitement. Josiah Crowley hid the will in a clock? She prompted. No, that wasn't it, Abby murmured, sighing again. "I know Josiah said something about a clock, but whatever it was has slipped my mind." Silence descended over the room. Nancy was wondering what connection the timepiece would have with the missing will. Mrs. Rowan was staring at the clock, evidently still trying to probe her memory. Suddenly, she gave a low cry. "There! It just came to me like that!" "What, Mrs. Rowan?" Nancy urged quietly, lest she startle the old woman into forgetfulness. "A notebook," Abby exclaimed triumphantly. Nancy's heart gave a leap, but she forced herself to say calmly, "Please, tell me more about this notebook." Excuse me. "Well, one day, not long before he passed away, Josiah said to me, 'Abby, after I'm dead, if my last will isn't found, you can learn about it in this little book of mine.'" "Do you know what became of the notebook, Mrs. Rowan?" "Oh, dearie me, there goes my memory again. No, I don't." Although baffled, Nancy felt a growing conviction that the whereabouts of the Josiah... Oh my gosh. Let me try that sentence again. Although baffled, Nancy felt a growing conviction that the whereabouts of the Crowley will was definitely tied up with a clock of some kind. But she pondered, why did the striking of the mantel clock remind Abby Rowan of the notebook? Impulsively, Nancy got up and went over to the mantel. She looked inside the glass front and in the back. There were no papers inside. Returning to her chair, Nancy asked the elderly woman, What became of the furnishings of the Crowley home when he gave it up? The Tophams got most everything. There must have been a family clock, Nancy mused, half to herself. A family clock, Abby repeated. Oh yes, there was a clock. Can you describe it? It was just an ordinary mantle type, something like mine. Tall, with a square face, the woman told Nancy. Only Josiah's was fancier, had some kind of moon on top. What became of the clock? Nancy questioned. I suppose the Tophams got it too. At last, Nancy, sure she had done all she could for Abby, and that she had learned as much as possible for the present, rose to depart. After saying goodbye, she stopped at a neighboring house and asked the occupants to look in occasionally on the ailing woman. I think maybe one of the county's visiting nurses should see Mrs. Rowan, she suggested. I'll phone the agency, the neighbor offered. Meanwhile, I'll go over myself. I'm so sorry I didn't know about Mrs. Rowan. As Nancy drove toward River Heights, she jubilantly reviewed the new facts in the case. Now, if I can only locate Mr. Crowley's notebook, or clock, or both. Nancy's brow knit in concentration. How would she go about tracking down the old timepiece? I guess, she concluded, if the Tophams do have the clock, I'll have to pay them a visit. While she did not relish the idea of calling on the unpleasant family, Nancy was determined to pursue every possible clue. Excuse me. I can just see Ada and Isabel's expressions when I appear at their front door, Nancy thought wryly. Well, I'll think of some excuse to see them. She was still mulling over the problem when she pulled into the driveway of her home and heard a familiar voice calling her name. Why, Helen Corning! Nancy exclaimed as a slim, attractive school friend of hers ran up. I haven't seen you for days. I've been busy lately, Helen explained, trying to sell 6 tickets for a charity ball. But I haven't had much luck. Would you like a couple? A sudden idea flashed into Nancy's mind at her friend's words. Helen, she said excitedly, I'll buy 2 of your tickets and sell the rest for you. The other girl stared in astonishment. Why, that's a wonderful offer, Nance, but Nancy's eyes danced. I know you think I've lost my mind. I really mean it, though. Please, let me take the tickets. I can't tell you my reasons yet, except my cause is a worthy one. Helen, looking relieved but bewildered, handed over the tickets. This is really a break for me, she said. Now I can leave for my aunt's Camp Avondale this evening, as I'd hoped. It's at Moon Lake. I thought I'd never get off with those tickets unsold. So I'm gonna explain a few things. So, in the game, Helen Corning is the one who calls Nancy to basically check up on an old friend of Helen's, and obviously Nancy winds up finding a mystery. And then Camp Avondale is actually a place you can go to in the game to deliver telegrams, because you get, like, if you want to, you can get like a temporary job at the telegram place and you get $0.25 for every telegram delivered, because the game is set in 1930 and a quarter was a lot of money back then. And then Moon Lake is actually from game number 7, Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake, where Nancy goes there to solve a mystery for her friend. Gosh, what was her friend's name? I think it was Sarah? No, Sally McDonald. Sally McDonald. Alright. Nancy smiled. "Have a grand time, Helen," she said. "How about coming along? It's not expensive, and there's room for lots more girls. We'd have loads of fun." "I'd love to," Nancy replied, "but right now, I can't get away." "Maybe you can make it later," Helen suggested. "If so, just zip on up. I'll be there for 2 weeks before the regular summer camp opens." The two friends chatted a little longer, then said goodbye. Nancy put the car away and then walked slowly towards her house, looking meditatively at the charity tickets in her hand. I told you, I have a hard time with some words. These are to be my passport to the Topham stronghold. It was the following afternoon when Nancy approached the large, pretentious house belonging to the Tophams. Bracing herself for what she realized would be a trying interview, Nancy mounted the steps and rang the doorbell. "Here goes," she thought. "I must be subtle in this maneuver to keep from arousing the Topham's suspicions." At that moment, a maid opened the door and, with a condescending look, waited for Nancy to state her mission. "Will you please tell Mrs. Topham that Nancy Drew is calling?" she requested. "I'm selling tickets for a charity dance. It's one of the most important functions of the year in River Heights," Nancy added impressively. It seemed ages to the young sleuth before the maid returned and said that Madame would see her. Nancy was ushered into the living room, which was so bizarre in its decor, she was startled. "Such an expensive hodgepodge," Nancy observed to herself, sitting down. She glanced at the pink carpet, which to her clashed with the red window drapes, and at an indiscriminate assortment of period furniture mixed with modern. A haughty voice interrupted her thoughts. "Well, what do you want, Nancy?" Mrs. Topham said. Mrs. Topham had sailed grandly into the room and seated herself opposite Nancy. "I'm selling," Nancy began pleasantly. "Oh, if you're selling things, I'm not interested," the woman broke in rudely. "I can't be handing out money to every solicitor who comes along." With difficulty, Nancy suppressed an angry retort to the cutting remark. "Mrs. Topham," she said evenly, "perhaps your mind didn't make it clear. I am selling tickets to a charity ball, which will be one of the loveliest affairs in River Heights this year." "Oh!" A slight change came over Mrs. Topham's face. Nancy sensed that her words had struck a responsive chord. The woman was well known for her aspirations to be accepted by the best families in River Heights. "Well," to Nancy's dismay, Mrs. Topham's response was cut off by the arrival of Ada and Isabel. The sisters entered the room, but did not at first notice Nancy's presence. They were intently carrying on a disgruntled conversation. Really? Ada was complaining. I'm positive that woman snubbed us deliberately. Then she and Isabel caught sight of Nancy and stopped short. They stared coldly at the visitor. What are you doing here? Isabel asked with a patronizing air. Mrs. Topham answered her daughter's question. Nancy is selling tickets to a charity dance, dear. It's to be a very important affair, and I think it will be beneficial for us to be present. Isabel tossed her head disdainfully. Don't waste your money, Mother. I didn't say Surrey. Jeez. Isabel's right, Ada chimed in. We don't want to go to a ball just anybody can go to. We only attend the most exclusive affairs. Absolutely, Ada declared in her haughtiest. Tone. Don't know that word. After all, Ada and I are very particular about the people we choose to meet. Mrs. Topham hesitated, evidently influenced by her daughter's argument. Nancy's heart sunk, and she feared her cause was lost. She fully realized that Ada and Isabel would stay away from the dance just to spite her. As she debated what her next move should be, Richard Topham walked into the living room. He was a thin man with sparse graying hair. His manner was rather nervous. Mrs. Topham perfunctorily introduced Nancy to her husband. These words, dude, holy crap. I gather you have some tickets to dispose of, Miss Drew, he said without ceremony. How many? Why, 4, Nancy replied in some surprise. I'll take them all. Mr. Topham opened his wallet with a flourish and drew out a $100 bill. Here you are. Keep the change for your charity. His daughters gasped, and his wife exclaimed, Richard, have you lost your senses? All that money? Listen, Mr. Topham retorted bluntly. This donation will entitle us to have our names on the programs as patrons. With this remark, he slumped into a chair and buried himself in the financial section of the newspaper. His family stared at one another, but they knew that the matter was closed. They never dared disturb him when he was absorbed in the stock market reports. Nancy aroused reluctantly. She still had not accomplished the real purpose of her visit, but she had no excuse for prolonging her stay. How could she find out about the Crowley clock? Was it the one on the mantelpiece? I must be going, she said. Then, looking at her wristwatch, she pretended that it had stopped and began to wind it. What time is it, please? There's a clock right in front of you on the mantel, Ada said sharply. Nancy looked at the timepiece. So there it is, she remarked casually. Is it an heirloom, perhaps, of the old Crowley clock I've heard so much about? Mrs. Topham looked down her nose. I should say not. This is a far more expensive one. Isabel rose to Nancy's bait. Cousin Josiah's old clock was a monstrosity. We wouldn't even have it cluttering up the attic. Nancy's hopes waned. Juan. I think it's Wayne. But she asked quickly, "Oh, then you sold it?" "No," Ada spoke up contemptuously. "Who'd give any money for that piece of junk? We sent it up to our bungalow at Moon Lake." See where this is going? Moon Lake. The words hit Nancy like a thunderbolt. Not only had the Topham girl given Nancy the very information she sought, but Helen Corning's invitation to Camp Avondale provided a valid reason to visit the resort. Now, if she could only figure out how to see the old clock. As if Ada had read the visitor's thoughts, she said airily, "We have some really fine pieces up at the cottage, Nancy. If you ever get up that way, drop in to see them. The caretaker will show you around." "Thank you. Thank you so much for everything," Nancy said, trying hard to conceal her excitement. As the door closed behind her, Nancy grinned with anticipation. "What luck," she told herself. "Moon Lake, here I come." That was a long chapter. Cut it. Give me 1 second. Chapter 10. Following a clue. With soaring spirits, Nancy walked homeward. "I wonder," she thought, "how the Tophams will feel about Josiah Crowley's old clock if it costs them the inheritance they're counting on." At dinner that night, Nancy chatted with unusual animation, deciding not to tell of her exciting plans after Hannah had served dessert. Mr. Drew, however, sensed that big news was coming. "My dear," he said, laying a hand on his daughter's arm, "you look like the cat that swallowed the canary. What's the big scoop?" Nancy giggled. "Oh, Dad, I can't keep any secrets from you." Then, as the table was cleared, the young sleuth told her great stroke of luck. "And just think, Helen invited me to her aunt's camp." "Good," her father commented, smiling. "You can combine business with pleasure, Nancy. Swimming and boating and fun with the girls will provide a much-needed vacation." "May I start first thing in the morning?" his daughter asked. "An excellent idea. The changes will do wonders for you. Go, by all means." Hurriedly, she packed a suitcase, and the next morning was off to an early start. Moon Lake was about a 50-mile drive. One way to go was past the Hoover girls' farm, and Nancy decided to stop there. As she approached the house, the young sleuth heard singing. It was coming from the barn. "How beautiful," she thought, as the clear soprano voice went through a series of trills and flute-like scales. In a moment, the singer appeared, and Nancy teasingly applauded. Allison's eyes danced. "Thanks. I was just trying to imitate some of the greats." "You'll be great yourself one of these days," Nancy prophesied. "Not unless I get some money to finance lessons," Allison said. "Any news, Nancy?" "Sort of. I've had a little luck." At this moment, Grace appeared and instantly invited Nancy to stay, but the young detective said she had work to do. "I hope to have a good report for you soon," she added, and waved goodbye. Grace's face brightened up, and Allison declared cheerfully, "Then there's still hope? We are so lucky to have you as a friend, Nancy. Come see us again soon, please." Excuse me. Resuming her journey, Nancy soon branched off from the river road and headed toward Moon Lake. As she drove along, her thoughts revolved constantly around the Crowley relatives and the Hoovers. She sighed. How different things would be for them if Josiah Crowley hadn't been so secretive. Her reverie was ended by the sudden strange actions of her car. It kept veering to the left of the road in spite of her efforts to keep it in the middle. With foreboding, Nancy stopped and got out to make an inspection. As she had suspected, a rear tire was flat. "Oh dear," she murmured in disgust. "Such luck." So in the game there's actually a sequence where you can get a flat tire if you roll over too many potholes, and if you don't put the flat tire on correctly and you start driving again, then that's a game over sequence because Nancy crashes her car. Anyway, though Nancy was able to change a tire, she never relished the task. Quickly, she took out the spare tire from the rear compartment, found the jack and lug wrench, and went to work. By the time her job was completed, she was hot and a little breathless. "Whew!" she exclaimed as she started on her way again. "I'll be ready for a nice cool swim in Moon Lake." It was 12 o'clock when she came in sight of Camp Avondale, run by Helen's aunt. Through the tall trees, Nancy caught a glimpse of cabins and tents. Beyond, the blue lake sparkled and glimmered. Beyond, comma. I keep forgetting that a comma is like you have to take a short pause before you read on. Okay. Beyond, the blue lake sparkled and glimmered in the sunlight. There we go. As Nancy drove into the camp, a group of girls gathered about her car. Helen came running out of a cabin to greet her new chum. No, not her new chum, just her chum. Crap. And there's a picture of all the girls at the lake, and there's Nancy in her car. I don't know which one is Helen, so I can't really point her out. "Girls, it's Nancy Drew!" she exclaimed joyfully and made introductions. Nancy did not know any of the campers, but in no time they made her feel warmly welcome. "Nancy," said Helen, "park your car back of the dining hall, then come have lunch." "That sounds wonderful," Nancy laughed. "I'm nearly starved." First, she was escorted to the main building where she met Aunt Martha, the camp director, and registered. "May she stay with me?" Helen asked. "Certainly, dear. I hope you have a splendid time, Nancy." "I'm sure I shall, Miss Aunt Martha." As the two girls walked off, Nancy told Helen about selling the charity dance tickets and gave her the money paid by Mr. Topham. "He surely was generous," Helen commented in surprise. Then she smiled wryly. "I have a feeling he did it for social prestige than sympathy for the cause." Nancy scarcely had time to deposit her suitcase under her cot and freshen up after the long ride when lunch was announced by the ringing of a bell. Campus hurried from all directions to the dining hall. The food was plain but appetizing, and Nancy ate with zest. The meal over, she was rushed from one activity to another. The girls insisted that she join them in a hike. Then came a cooling dip in the lake. Nancy enjoyed herself immensely, but the Crowley mystery was never far from her mind. "I must find out where the Topham's cottage is located," she reminded herself, and next managed to go there alone. Nancy's opportunity to accomplish the first part of her quest came when Helen suggested about 5 o'clock. How about going for a ride around the lake in the camp launch? There's just time before supper. Wonderful, Nancy accepted readily. By the way, can you see many of the summer cottages from the water? Oh yes, lots of them. Helen led her friend down to a small dock and with 4 other girls climbed into the launch, a mid-sized craft. As one of the campers started the motor, Helen remarked, "It's always a relief to us when this engine starts. Once in a while it balks, but you never know when or where." "Yes," spoke up a girl named Barbie. "And when you're stuck this time of year, you're stuck. There are hardly any cottagers up here yet, so their boats are still in winter storage." As the little launch turned out into the lake, Nancy was entranced with the beautiful sight before her. The delicate azure blue of the sky and the mellow gold of the late afternoon sun were reflected in the water, shimmering surface of the water. I am I'm not doing so well today. Whoa. What a lovely scene for an oil painting, Nancy thought. As they sped along, however, Nancy kept glancing at the cottages, intermingled with tall evergreens that bordered the shoreline. I told you, I'm tired. The Tophams have a bungalow up here, haven't they? She questioned casually. Yes, it's across the lake, Helen replied. We'll come to it soon. Is anyone staying there now? Oh no, the cottage is closed. It's been looked after by Jeff Tucker, the caretaker. He's the tallest, skinniest man I've ever seen outside of the circus. Is it hard to get to the place? Not if you go by launch, but it's a long way if you take the road around the lake. Helen looked at her friend. I didn't know you were particularly interested in the Tophams, Nancy. Oh, they're not friends of mine, as you know, Nancy returned hastily. I was merely curious. After a time, as the launch slowed down and chugged along close to shore, Helen pointed out a wide path through the woods. At the end of it stood a large, rambling white cottage. That's the Topham's place, she said. Trying not to appear too eager, Nancy looked intently at the bungalow. She made a quick mental note of its location. Tomorrow I'll visit that place and try to solve this mystery, she told herself. And that's the end of chapter 10. Alright. Excuse me. Anyway, I hope you guys are liking this series. If you are, leave a comment down below. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, share, and suggest things that you want to see me do in future videos. I should be saying that from now on. Anyway, I am going to go eat dinner and try to wake myself up a bit, because it's definitely not time for bed yet. So, yep. Like, comment, subscribe, share, suggest things you would like me to do in future videos, and I will see you in the next one. Love you, Dream Chasers.